Welcome to the El Dorado Irrigation District Board meeting. Can we call this meeting to order? Roll call, please.
Directors Osborne, Veerkamp, and Zini, Dwyer, and Day present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Clerk of the Board Sullivan. Meeting call to order at 9 a.m.
Okay. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Director Osborne, would you lead us off?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So we'll move on to adopting the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been, it was moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Veerkamp to adopt the agenda.
If members of the public would like to address the board during this meeting, at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. Right now, we're looking for any public comment on the adoption of today's agenda, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Veerkamp. President Anzini, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to comment on the adoption of today's agenda. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay. Board members vote. Heard the bell there.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we will move on to communications. Our General Manager, employee recognition.
I have none today.
Yes.
Oh, we do.
We actually.
I apologize.
Corrected.
Thank you.
We do have,
Oh, yes. Hang on, let me get to it. Yes, thank you. We did receive a nice email from Laurel Brentbaum, who's the Chamber Executive Director or Executive Officer, complimenting Bill Cassidy, our Senior Water Use Efficiency Technician. And she wrote, "Bill is by far the most customer service-oriented individual I have ever encountered. He showed real concern for our issues and spent as much time as needed to answer questions and even brainstorming solutions." It's just a great example of excellent customer service. So thank you, Bill. And that concludes the recognition.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for representing EID in the best light. And for our customers, we always enjoy hearing the good things about our employees. So we'll move on to public comment, and this is an opportunity for anybody in the public, either here or online, to make a suggestion or to discuss something that is not on the agenda.
if members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Anzini, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to address the board during our open comment, public comment period.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to communications. General Manager.
Jennifer, do I have anything to report?
I'm sorry for
None
that
today.
earlier.
Thank
I just
you.
didn't want to miss the opportunity to give kudos to staff, especially since he can't even be here this morning because we have him out working, slaving away for the district.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Nothing to report.
All right. Clerk to the board. Anything?
Jim, do I have anything?
A marriage made in heaven. Okay. Board of Directors, any items? Director Osborne.
In the interest of a little levity and humor, I've always used the squirrel index. And this is for Dan to ponder. But this is a ponderosa pine cone, And this is what is left of it after the squirrels, and they are destroying the cone, I mean, everywhere. And so for all of the board, and then pass it around to staff so they can get an understanding of what I'm talking about.
So exactly what does that mean?
I thought that was a dead squirrel in the bag when you first brought that up. You scared me.
I can only say that show and tell here is very interesting.
And what is the significance of the chewed?
I've
pine
Googled it, and they don't have an answer. They just say, yeah, they like to eat cones.
Actually, they're pulling the seeds out of the cone to eat, so.
Your squirrels aren't very hungry. Mine are, oh, there it is, that little thing. Dan, do you want me to file it?
Well, I
in the,
can, the acorn report is a lot more accurate, I'm just telling you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, next month.
So, thank you for the brevity. Director Veerkamp?
We have a LAFCO meeting this Wednesday night at 5:30 at the County Board of Supervisors. So hopefully we'll finalize an executive director and work on the grand jury report. Those are always fun.
Oh, that's always fun.
Yep.
Any other board member? Yes, Director Dwyer.
Well, nobody told me it was show and tell today, or I would have brought something. I did have the opportunity, I was invited to go speak at Ponte Pomero at one of their luncheon. They just wanted general information about EID and where the water comes from. They're not direct customers, so they don't actually pay the bill. They don't get the waterfront in the mail. So they miss some of the information that's contained in those excellent documents. And they were most concerned not about the rates, but about the water supply and where it comes from, and how come we are building so many houses in Folsom. So I just assured them that we're okay for right now, and the mandate for conservation is a good thing for everyone, but it's not our mandate, it's from the governor's office. So.
Who could blame anybody? Okay. Nothing to report from Director Day. And as Director Dwyer, I too have been answering questions from various individuals, mostly online, to kind of reassure people about how our water management plan is following the law, and we're doing a very good job there. But I also remind them that they're doing a very good job doing the conservation for us, because we are conserving more than 15%. And that's the truth that everybody needs to report, that as a unison, all of our customers are providing that conservation, and it helps us for the next year. All right, we're going to move on to approving the consent calendar. Any items that need to be pulled from the consent calendar before we approve the consent calendar? Board members? Okay.
I'll move approval.
Okay, it's been moved and approved by Director Veerkamp, seconded by Director Day, to approve the consent calendar as it's posted. Anybody from the public?
President Anzini, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on the adoption of today's consent calendar, moved by Director Veerkamp and seconded by Director Day. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay.
Director Osborne?
Oh, I'm sorry. He's dreaming of pine cones.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
Okay. We'll move on to action items on the agenda. We'll start with item number 6.
Move one.
Okay, it's been motioned and seconded to approve action item number 6.
Madam Chair, if you would, let the record reflect that I will be recusing myself from this item.
Okay, perfect. Director Veerkamp will recuse himself from this item. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment on item number 6 in the action items?
President Anzini, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on action item number 6. Option 1 moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Day. With Director Veerkamp recusing himself, I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay. Go.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
All right. We'll move on to item number 7, which is operations. Come forward and speak the truth.
Have I ever lied to you?
No, you haven't.
Thank you. I don't know about that.
Let the public know your name.
Good morning, Patrick Wilson, Drinking Water Operations Manager. Today presenting on the Drought Emergency Declaration Stage 1 Water Alert Ratification, as well as the Stage 4 Water Emergency Authorization for Outingdale. Next slide. Some of the previous board actions. One that I'd like to draw attention to, I won't go through all of them, is July 26th of 2021, the board did ratify Resolution 2021-009 to maintain the drought emergency and ratified the general manager's declaration of a stage 4 water emergency for Outingdale customers, which is very much in line with what I'm presenting on today. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. No, it's all good.
Sorry, you guys, I just want to.
Thank you. Some additional board action item, previous board action items, and very similarly at every regular board meeting, since its adoption, the board has ratified resolution number 2022-019, and subsequently, more recently in July, the board did award a contract to Dorado Water and Shower in the not to exceed amount of $194,590 for potable water hauling to the Outingdale water system when needed. So the summary of the issue, the board adopted the resolution 2022-019 to maintain a stage 1 water alert, ensuring compliance with the Sacramento Water Regional Control Board's emergency regulations. Subsequently, the middle fork of the Consumnes River has continued its slow decline, and it may be necessary to initiate water hauling of potable drinking water, and therefore hauling water would require and trigger a stage 4 water emergency condition. Next slide. So currently the district has been under a stage 1 alert since June 28th of 2021 with a voluntary conservation of up to 15%, as Director Anzini had mentioned. The district's water supply in 2022 is much improved, and even though the rest of the state continues to experience a drought, and Outingdale is really kind of fallen outside of that purview of the rest of the main system. The water right for Outingdale was curtailed since June of 2022, but the district secured permission from the Regional Control Board to continue diversion so long as the district can operate the drinking water system in that and be able to treat the raw water. The anticipated challenges in the diversion from the middle fork of the Consumnes, we need the adequate stream flow, and water quality reliability to meet the regulatory standards. Water hauling would provide only health and safety levels of water use, which I'll get into a little bit later. So stage 1 alert has initiated public awareness of possible water shortages and encouraged water conservation with a target of up to 15% of voluntary demand from a reduction of the 2020 levels. We do continue to make progress towards this goal, and we at this time have sufficient water and storage to meet demands and carryover targets. Next slide, please. Outingdale, on the other hand, has had its struggle and is continuing to be in that forefront, as the middle fork of the Consumnes is its only water source, and there are no flow impoundments upstream. We have no dams or diversions or way to add water to that system. River levels may continue to drop until diversion is precluded. Water quality is the main source of concern at this time, which I'll get into in a few slides. And we are requesting the board authorize the general manager to declare a stage 4 water emergency when necessary.
Patrick, I was under the impression that the releases from Jenkinson Lake actually could help with this issue. Is that incorrect?
Dan, do you want to talk?
Good morning, Patrick. Still getting his mental watershed map oriented. So while Patrick's managing the technical aspects, I could talk to the policy level aspects. That's your question, Director Dwyer. The way that the Jenkinson Lake storage is assisting the district is that, unfortunately, where those releases, they come into the North Fork, and we're on the middle fork of the Cosumnes, so we're one watershed over. But by making those releases, we can continue to divert this water that's physically available because there's no intermediary downstream beneficial users that are impacted by us. But unfortunately, we can't quite push the water through that watershed. So we're effectively trading water, if you will, in accordance with state water resource control.
So in effect, we're not helping the Middle Fork, but we're helping further downstream.
Exactly.
And so that's the trade-off the state and with the agreement that we got.
Right, and so and we've obviously, as you know, we've looked many times at trying to extend that line, but very costly, not to mention the water quality challenges. So it's a matter of trading physically available water for that downstream confluence location. So,
Thank you very much for the clarification.
And Jennifer asked me to make sure you know I'm the operations director, Dan Corcoran. Good morning.
So I just want to add one point, and that is it's important to understand that the water right that the district relies upon to supply the community with Outingdale with water is somewhat junior compared to many of the district's other water rights. Consequently, when there are curtailments, that water right gets curtailed fairly early. The purpose of curtailments is to preserve water for more senior uses. So theoretically, there are senior uses downstream that require the water that we would otherwise divert for the community of Outingdale. We make up for that by releasing water from Jenkinson Lake, which finds its way down eventually to those more senior water right holders.
So here's a photo from August 8th. You can see it's still going over the spillway there in Outingdale with the water board. So we are still seeing clearly water that's making its way down this watershed. Next slide. So one of the items I'd like to kind of focus on here is kind of the bands of water hauling, which is shown up in the top right. As you can see, we've hauled water, obviously, 14, 15, and 21, and it's kind of been spread out. 21 kind of being somewhat of an odd year as you look down to the green at the bottom where we kind of really fell flat late in June, and in terms of the flow that was available in the Cosumnes, but we were still able to treat that water. Subsequently, the blue line, 2022 there with the dashed and the projected kind of shows that we're still obviously above that 2021 water hauling that we were forced into last year. However, one of the challenges that we are seeing already is the source water quality is deteriorating, albeit no more rapidly than it has been historically, but it's something that we are being mindful of, and we're working with labs to actually pull routine sampling on a weekly basis to help us do a little bit better predictive modeling to when we'll need to haul water, that is. Next slide, please. So in a little bit better detail, so these are reads from this year so far showing the decline. And as you can see, for the month of June and July, it was following a pretty apparent trend on the way down. However, on August 9th and then subsequently on the 17th, which is not shown, we're seeing a flattening off of the falling. So we had 9.2, and then on the 17th, we have a read of 8.1 CFS in that watershed. The main point that I'd like to make is that we are seeing that there is available water. It's far more going to be the quality of the water that's going to be the cause of concern and the need for hauling the water at some point in the future.
What in particular, is it the mineral content? Is there byproducts coming from the shore? How is it affecting the quality?
Yeah, the quality has been primarily, historically, has been coliform, and that's been kind of the trigger that we've been monitoring at this point. We are monitoring TOC, total organic carbon as well, but we're still probably levying that it's going to be the coliform. Right now, we're above the detection limit at the current lab. We're working on getting a secondary lab involved to hopefully give us a better quantifiable number, because when you get to the reporting limit, they stop, and then ultimately it's just a flat line at that point.
Right.
It's not really giving us any additional information, so we're working this morning to try to find other labs that are going to help us to get better
Continue
results.
to track it.
Yeah,
Right.
so we can try to track it and proactively determine when we're going to need to haul that water, so we're not calling at the last minute to Dorado water shower and hopefully give them enough of a heads up. So they are available to us on the next day, but we'd like to avoid that with the predictive modeling.
And is this you, Patrick?
That's what I was going to fill in a little time while we work out the IT issues here. And I think it's important just for historical context of every time we do get these low flows, this is expected. So I just want to make sure that's clear to the board, and it's expected to staff. They know this will be a challenge. Anytime flows slow down, you've seen creeks, we just start to get this normal development of algae and bacteria. So this is a normal anticipated water quality challenge that staff are following very closely. And so Patrick will make the call. It's a matter of sufficient water quantity and sufficient water quality. When we came to you earlier this year, we were thinking it was going to be water quantity that was the limitation, but now more than likely it's going to be water quality, but that's where Patrick will make that call when we do initiate hauling. You've already approved that contract. Our local vendor, as you mentioned, is in place, so we're ready to go when necessary, but it is about $1,000 per day every day that we do haul. So as long as water is physically available in accordance with approval from the State Water Resource Control Board, the General Counsel, it's definitely in our interest, provided we can continue to meet public health and safety needs. So, and that's all I can fill in. I apologize. I tried to do the best I could. So.
Just for the record, the public can still hear us and see us, and they can still see the PowerPoint. So Patrick has the PowerPoint up here. So if we it'll just take a slide or two if we could just keep going instead of pausing the meeting.
Okay.
Next slide.
But still continue to talk into.
You got it. So in May of 2022, the district, let me back up. For the Outingdale public outreach, in May of 2022, the district commenced a community outreach letter itemizing the upgrades that were done to the facility, as well as the potential need for water hauling due to the incurring ongoing drought. In August 12th, 2022, there was a letter sent out and an email notifying customers, advising them of the conditions, as well as a request for the board for Stage 4 authorization and a request to take appropriate measures in advance of the anticipated use restrictions. Subsequently, we have a drafted implementation letter. If Stage 4 conditions are triggered, all customers will receive a letter and email notifying them of the use restrictions that are in effect. Next slide. And those restrictions would require a Stage 4 water emergency greater than 50% reduction, prohibiting automatic sprinklers and only allowing drip or hand watering with a shutoff nozzle. Health and safety water allotment given by the Department of Water Resources is 50 gallons per person. And there is one small farm that is out there that will have a requirement for 65% reduction.
Quick comment, maybe just a editorial tweak.
Yeah.
When we say no automatic sprinklers, most drip systems are automatic. You know, they're hooked up that way. So we might want to look through our drought action plan and change the verbiage to no automatic overhead sprinklers. Because that would be, I think, confusing to people if, say, next year or down the road, we had to say something.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a question as well. Have we received any feedback from the community about any of the community members in our initial outreach?
I have not. I haven't heard anything myself. You haven't, Dan has not either, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Board option to ratify resolution number 2022-019 to maintain the drought emergency and stage 1 water alert, requesting up to 15% voluntary conservation, and authorize the general manager, subject to subsequent board ratification, to declare a stage 4 water emergency for Outingdale customers if and when necessary. Recommendations, option 1.
Okay.
Just for the record, customer service just weighed in and said that they have not received any calls in the customer service area regarding Outingdale either.
Perfect. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Yes,
I have a
Director
comment.
Dwyer.
I'd just like to recognize our PR folks and Jesse and Patrick and the water group for the outreach and, being as transparent as possible in this issue. And so thank you very much.
Okay.
Before we have much further discussion, can we have a first and a second unless you have questions?
Yes.
I'll move approval. I'll second.
Okay, motion by Director Veerkamp and seconded by Director Dwyer.
I'd just like to add in Jenny Downey's staff's also a big part of that communication outreach.
Absolutely. Okay, now there's a motion on the floor. Now, public comment or directors?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. This is the public comment period for action item number 7, option 1, moved by Director Veerkamp and seconded by Director Dwyer. President Anzini, at this time, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak.
Okay, we'll move on to the vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
I think our camera's frozen up there, but that's okay. Yeah, it does. Got my wrong side. We will move to,
Is it frozen on yours? Okay.
yes, thank you. We will move forward to item number 8.
Before Kerry makes his presentation, I'd like to also embarrass him. Kerry has been promoted to the Hydro Division Manager's position. So congratulations, Kerry. Brian Mueller's very upset with Dan Corcoran stealing all his people, but that's okay. So congratulations, Kerry.
Thank you so much.
Don't stand up there, go out and make some money.
You got people to do that.
Ooh. Yeah. Presentation ready?
I'm wondering, can Brian Folsom, can you see the presentation or is it frozen on your side?
Nope, I can see it.
So ours is frozen, however, it does not look like any members of the public are frozen. So we will
not.
We can share our books.
move forward.
I can see it. It's fine. To members of the public who are online, please excuse our IT problems. We are correcting them.
The video is off. So we're just going to pause for a second. We're still here. We just have some errors on our side, just please stand by. We're still here, folks. Just give us another minute. We don't want to stop the webinar and then restart it and have to have everybody call back in. So if you just want to hold on here for 1 second while we work out the issues on our side. Okay, actually, we're just going to go ahead and move forward, and Carrie can use the screen from this side while we don't hold up these folks.
Oh, can we turn it? There we go. All right, we're gonna see what we can do with this. All right, Carrie Muchler, Senior Civil Engineer for the district, at least for another week. Coming forward to discuss the Flume 45 Section 3. And we'll get into the, I remember last month we were before the board for the abutment section. We're going to kind of tie those together as we go through the presentation. Next slide. So the previous board actions are the adoption of the last year's CIP, subject to funding for this project. Next slide. Oh, this is the one where I need the slide.
I'm sorry?
There's a map showing. I don't know if you can remember the map from, oh, let's see, do we get it? Hold on just a second. Or I can draw it if we can. I can kind of draw it if we want to go to that point. Is it going to come up? Wait, just for.
No, we're pausing just for a second again.
Okay, we're going to pause for a second.
Can folks online see
Yes.
I think we're okay.
Do you want me to keep going? Okay. If you remember last month when I was before the board, 45 abutment was a small 200-foot section that we were replacing. That's where the abutment wall had completely collapsed, and we were just kind of bolstering that up. 45 Section 3 is the downstream portion of that from the abutment section downstream. It's about 900 feet in length. If you remember, we've got between Highway 50 is right below the flume, and then we get to the river. So this is one of those sections where if we have something, it's gonna hit Highway 50 right off, and we're just down from Riverton area on Highway 50. So next slide. Oh. And we lost that. So now I assume that the public can no longer see?
We're going to have to pause this meeting. We're going to shut everything down because I've lost connectivity on my side, so he can't see anything. So I apologize to members of the public. We're going to be shutting it down, and we will restart momentarily.
We will have a five to 6 minute recess, correct? All right.
And we are back. Is this where you want to be, or back at the map?
Go back to the map. Let's go back to show the map.
Brian, move around a little bit. Okay.
So shall we bring this meeting back to order? Thank you for your patience for those online and those here in the room.
All right, so this is the map I was referring to. Where the arrow is pointing for Flume 45, that is the abutment section area. And the rest will be from that arrow downstream is about what we're looking at for the design of this project. So next slide. So the summary that we've got going on right now, Flume 45, Section 3, it does have some degraded areas. And some of the videos or the pictures will show that, what we're mostly concerned about. There was a section that was stabilized in 91 by PG&E. They brought in a bunch of steel I-beams and stuff. We're going to see pictures of that and how that works into our project. And, we are just trying to get this ready for the 2023, 2024 construction season. I'll go a little bit more detail on that and the aggressive schedule that we have scheduled for this flume section. Next slide. So a little background. Flume 45 overall is around 1,900 feet long. It's our second longest wooden flume currently. Section 3 was had some replacements in 1991. Most of this section of flume is on the historic 1870 rock wall, a rather big rock wall on the part that we're concerned about. And there's one section that has the significant slide area. And so that's what we're really working on. Again, that stability measures were implemented in 91 on that 30-foot tall rock wall section for the whole flume. And this project is going to require approval from the U.S. Forest Service and the State Historic Preservation Officer. Brian Deason will go into a little bit more detail on that slide in a little bit. Next slide. All right, so here's what we're looking at. This is the downstream portion. This is from the spillway down to where we go into an earthen canal. This stuff is in still pretty good condition. But the whole section, since we're here, we're touching it, we're going to do some improvements to it. This section is where we envision a bench to go in. So we'll have a bench. We have one just downstream, but we're going to improve that. We're going to hopefully go to the U-shape, move that over, and be able to get to our spillway when we need to get to do work with that. Next slide. This is the troubled section right here. The beams that you see right next in the picture are the spillway. The steel columns and that's the stuff that PG&E did in 1991. I've got another picture that shows exactly what's going on there. It's a little bit more on a profile. You can see the bulge in the rock, similar to what we had on the abutment section. Just above it, you'll see some retaining wall. Why don't we go to the next picture and I can get into some more detail as we progress. This is what's going on underneath the spillway. We do have leaks in this canal. You can see where some of the wood is beginning to experience that dry rot condition. So we need to get in here, get that done. The timbers are directly on the ground. So that will get resolved and get elevated so we don't have that issue with the degradation of the timbers. And then you can see some parts of the spillway underneath. Yeah, right there, Jennifer, just that you can see where the wood is degraded even further, right in there. Next slide. So if you look underneath that steel structure, you can see where the wall has bulged out. That's why PG&E went in there. If you look just a little bit down to the lower part, you will also see another bulge a little bit further towards the bottom of the picture. A little bit more. Oh, thank you. Let me just do it. I'm way over here. Right in this area right here, this is where we're seeing that rock bulge again. And that's the concern because we don't have the protections in place for that. So that's what this project is going to be, is addressing, is getting that taken care of. The other portion.
And so if I could ask again and reiterate, the concern is if that bulge gets worse and the rock wall gives way, that's directly down onto Highway 50.
Correct. And the flume would, yeah, that's when the flume gives way. The other portion that we're stabilizing, again, PG&E in 91 put this structure in right here. We're kind of perplexed why they did this, but it's steel I-beams, but they put wood behind it. And now all that wood is deteriorated, especially on this portion right here. You can just see there's large holes in this part and in this section right here. You can actually, right in here is you can just put your hand right through that. So it will be to stabilize this hillside to get that so we don't have that coming down and wiping out the flume. For the remainder of the upstream portion, we've kind of got this kind of example with this. And this is all goes in and out of the historic rock wall, and it varies from maybe 2 to 3 feet to maybe 5 or 6 feet. But it's, again, that historic rock wall. This will all get put into the U-shaped. The nice thing about this project is we're not building access. We have an access road right here. That's this road. Goes down to our propane tank. So the beauty of that is we can put the concrete pumper truck right there and do our spraying without having to build another access road, which is a good savings for us. And it moves everything over, and again, we're trying to limit those MSE walls as much as we can. But all this is going to get shaked out in the design when we get going with that. So scope of work, we've got to develop the replacement and stabilization alternatives for the historic rock wall. That's what we'll be taking to SHPO. We're going to need to get consultation with the Forest Service, and again, Brian Deason's going to get into some more detail with that. We need to do a geotechnical analysis of all that site. That means also going and doing some bores on that rock wall. Let's see we've got to find out what's behind it to see what we can tie into. Then we'll finalize that design. We're developing this right now for the 2023, 2024, both those outages. So it's going to take 2 years to get this project done. 940 feet is more than we can do in one. So we need to get that phasing. How that looks, we don't have an idea yet. You know, do we just tackle that big, tall rock wall section? You know, where's the break point? So that'll be up to the designers to give us that and how we're going to do that. Our schedule is very aggressive. Again, Brian Deason will talk to some of that. But we've got to get the seismic refraction. We've got to get the borings. The design isn't on that wall section, isn't your typical, get an MSE and into there. So all that needs to do, and then the environmental review. For our proposals, we had 5 firms that went out to look at the site. We got 3 proposals. All these companies have worked very well with us in the past, and all have done flumes within the last few years. GHD, of course, we know has been very instrumental on getting our stuff up and going from the Caldor fire. They are our low bidder at $421,000. And so with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Brian to go over the environmental aspect.
Okay. I just have one slide. Good morning, Brian Deason, Environmental Resources Supervisor for the district, and I'm here today just to provide the board an overview of what our plan is for complying with the California Environmental Quality Act for this project, or CEQA. So as with other flume projects, this project is subject to CEQA. This project is unique in the fact that it sits atop a historic rock wall. And this historic rock wall is considered a historic resource under CEQA. It's historic because of its quality of the craftsmanship associated with the design and construction. As you can see from that photo that Carrie had shown, that rock wall has been there for 150 years, and it's now just starting to show some bulging. So anyways, because this project would likely have substantial adverse effects to the rock wall, it's either going to require substantial modification in place or complete removal and replacement. That would be a potentially significant effect under CEQA. A potentially significant effect under CEQA requires preparation of an environmental impact report. So we're proposing to prepare that for the environmental review for this project. We've initiated in-house the first step which is preparation of an initial study / notice of preparation for the project. So our staff is working on that now. What that document will do will allow us to help focus the review and scope of the EIR. It will likely primarily focus on the potential effects associated with the impacts to the rock wall. We will be seeking support from our on-call environmental firms in help for preparing the EIR, as well as a historical architect to help us evaluate potential effects to the rock wall. Any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back over to Carrie.
All right, next slide. So the cost for the funding for the design, we've got the GHD's contract for $421,000. I've calculated the capitalized labor at around $155, and then for the professional services for the environmental review for that EIR is going to be around $100 to bring the total funding for the contract for $676,523. Next slide. So board options, option 1, award a contract to GHD Inc. in the not to exceed amount of $421,523 for the design of Flume 45 Section 3 and authorize additional funding of $155,000 for capitalized labor and $100,000 for professional service for environmental support for a total funding request of $676,523 for the Flume 45 Section 3 replacement project, project number 22014.01. We recommend option 1.
Okay.
I'll move option 1.
Okay, so it's been motioned by Director Dwyer, seconded by Director Osborne to move on with this. Item number 8, now discussion.
Okay, thank you, Director Anzini. It seems like a really, really aggressive schedule.
Yes.
Because with all the issues that could present themselves, already evident, and other things that could come up, it looks like we'll have to have the design finished by the April-May timeframe in order to go out to bid for the actual construction. Is that even, you know, the resumes are impressive from GHD, but everybody said they were good, but they didn't really say they were fast.
The design is actually not the critical path. The critical path is the EIR.
Okay.
That's what's driving it. We've got a pretty good handle on what we can do with the design. It's stuff we've done in the past, but it's that EIR and the consultation with the Forest Service and SHPO that's any real kind of delay, that's what's going to bump that to the next year. We're aware of that. We think we've got, you know, it's feasible the way we've got it outlined, but one little wrench and yeah, we'll be moving that construction season a year.
And our cooperation with the Forest Service has been very good on the other
Stellar,
flumes,
yes.
so thanks.
Yes.
Okay, Director Osborne has a question.
I think you just answered my question. It was for Brian. What are the archaeological folks saying from the Forest Service in reference to this 150-year-old wall and what we can do to mitigate tearing it down?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yeah, we work very closely with the Forest Service specialists, including the archaeologists, biologists, and the district rangers. So we have, informed them that this project is coming. You may recall, Director Osborne, that we had a similar project at Flume 41 back in 2009, 2010.
Yep.
And so as a part of that project, ultimately the rock wall had to be encased in shotcrete, and I probably won't get all the engineering terms correct, but pinned in place and stabilized in place. As a part of that project, we were able to mitigate by documenting the rock wall and all of its engineering features, photographs, et cetera, as mitigation, so that information about that resource was not lost.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I do have one comment and not a question. I think maybe it is a question. If we do nothing and not expend this money, which is just the beginning of a very large financial project. And say, for instance, we get a monsoon coming in, and it takes that whole thing out and goes down to Highway 50. What are going to be the costs to replace that and repair that?
I do not have an answer for that if it was to go out. We would seriously want to look if, with the length of that and how much is taken out, you know, the possibility, we have the wood to go with a certain amount of that. We have that in the stores and we've purchased that. The concrete, again, we aren't dealing with what we did on the Caldor fire with the 4, 5, and 6, where we had to put in miles of road. We've got the road there. The problem with that comes into if we wash that out is now design is behind construction. And that is what always gets us on these emergency projects. We lose a lot of that efficiency by having a design in place. Case in point was Flume 30, right? We had a design in place. We already knew that versus 4, 5, and 6. And it was just altering on that design. And we came in just, I think we were, what, 2-3% over what the original cost of that project would have been. 4, 5, and 6, on the other hand, we had nothing in place. We were kind of, you know, we had the designers out there. We were going as we went along, but as they're excavating, we all of a sudden, like the rock pocket, the hole pocket that we came across, it stops. Construction stops. We lose 3 days, and we've got thousands of dollars up on that hill that are just sitting kind of idle because we got to get that design and figure out what we can do first, you know. So it's getting the designs done early before we have a problem are key to that. And I've been trying to make sure that we get designs ahead of us, so if something were to happen, like the lettered flumes, those we have already designed ready to go. If we were to lose any of those lettered flumes, we've already got the design. We can go out and get those fixed. But it's that design build criteria where we don't have the geotechnical. We're doing it as we dig, and we don't know what's underneath, and it just, the efficiencies just are horrendous with that.
So I guess the reason why I asked that question is in the outcome of what it would do for Highway 50 tourism or travel. If that mountain comes down, does it go right on to Highway 50? Of course, we would lose a portion, our water supply. We do have plenty in the reservoirs, but not right now, but we would in a monsoon situation. But my concern is the bulge that you pointed out. I'm not an engineer, but I know enough about what happens with mountains and water coming down on them. We all do.
Yes.
That bulge is concerning because if that is such a historic wall, where do we find the delays? And as Director Dwyer said, if it is and you have said that this would be an aggressive way of treating it or dealing with it, my concerns are what would happen if we didn't approve this or if it gets so slowed down. And that's my biggest concern.
So if I understand, you're just wondering what happens.
Would it cost more?
Yeah, I mean, if it'll cost more, if it fails,
right,
it'll cost more.
Okay.
That's where we get, like I said, that's where the efficiencies come in. We try to keep those inefficiencies on these emergencies to a minimum, but they just happen as a thing because we're trying to grab supplies as other people are also grabbing those same supplies because they're having the same emergencies.
Right.
So where we're trying to grab, say like the C350, the fabric that, you know, we nail down into the hill slope to stabilize it, everybody else is grabbing it. We have to pull that. I believe that comes from Louisiana. This is where it's manufactured. That's a 3-4 day road trip for a truck driver to get supplies up.
Okay.
I just think back at Flume 10, when we had the landslide there, cost about $17 million, if I'm not mistaken. A couple other flumes are impacted there. I think the primary issue for me would be, would we be able to get the water supply back in service by peak demand in June? And I think Flume 17, we made it within a week or two. So it would be a significant impact to our customers during the peak watering season, as well as probably double the cost. That's kind of a guess on what the emergency repairs versus a planned, structured construction schedule would be.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? No? Okay, public comment.
This is a public comment period for action item number 8, option 1, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Osborne. President Anzini, at this time, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 8. I believe we're ready for the vote.
Okay, members vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 9.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Liz Carrington, Senior Civil Engineer here at the district. Today, I will be presenting a contract change order and project funding for the Motherlode Force Main Phase 3 project. Next slide, please. Previous board actions include approval of the capital improvement plan back in November of last year. The board authorized additional funding for design services and capitalized labor at the beginning of this year. And just recently, the board authorized additional funding for environmental services and engineering services. Summary of issues. The Motherlode Force Main was originally constructed in 1979, consisting of 12-inch asbestos cement pipe. The district has witnessed historical failures in this pipeline in 1999, 2012, and 2021. All of these pipe failures have disrupted wastewater collection service. Therefore, programmatic replacement will enhance overall system reliability. Next slide. Alrighty, Motherlode Force Main. It is a 40-year-old 9-mile conveyance system, 8 miles of which is a force main, which is pressurized flow for flow of raw wastewater. This pipeline services the town center force main and the upstream 3 lift stations, as well as a cluster of 8 additional lift stations to the east. Raw wastewater flows from El Dorado lift station to Deer Creek wastewater treatment plant and has a peak flow capacity of 2 million gallons per day. To date, approximately 50% of the pipeline has been replaced with corrosion-resistant plastic pipe. Next slide. Alrighty. Just upstream of the Motherlode Force Main is the El Dorado lift station. This facility has WDRs, or waste discharge requirements, set forth by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Within those WDRs, there is a northern equalization pond, and this is for use for temporary emergency storage only. Typically, that's been when we've had excessive rain events or when we've had failures in the Motherlode Force Main. Alrighty. Most recently, we had 2 failures back-to-back, unfortunately a day apart. This was just several days after the 10-inch rainfall within a 36-hour period in October. We had a spiral fracture for this first failure, and then the second failure was the next day. Alrighty. This longitudinal fracture occurred 2 pipe segments upstream, and district staff enlisted the assistance of Doug Beerkamp General Engineering to perform these repairs. Both of these failures occurred during high flow when the high horsepower pump at El Dorado Lift was in service. Both of these failures resulted in a Category 1 SSO, a release of wastewater. Luckily, the wastewater did not reach surface water drainages. Next slide. Alrighty. When we were in the repair process of this pipeline, our wastewater collection staff had the opportunity to launch a closed-circuit television inspection camera within the pipeline. On the left is an example of a corroded pipe, and then on the right is the non-corroded pipe. For about 200 feet upstream, there was corrosion in the pipe, and then luckily, we were able to see some non-corroded pipe light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, downstream, we did not find non-corroded pipe downstream. We got to a time crunch where the pipe was ready to be put back in surface, and so we couldn't continue with that television inspection, but I think we got enough documentation to make a good decision moving forward with the scope. Next slide. Alrighty. So moving forward, staff enlisted the help of Domenicelli and Associates to design improvements for 3A, 3B, and 3C of the mother lode force main. I did want to call attention to the most downstream segment. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a green pipeline. That I'm not discussing at this board presentation, but that it can be identified as the Strolling Hills pipeline, which is also included in our CIP. So a little bit of foreshadowing there. Alrighty, so as we were going through the design of these 3 segments, each about 1 mile long, staff discovered 2 creek crossings, one on 3B, one on 3C, and so unfortunately those creek crossings require a little bit more analysis before we go out to bid. So staff decided to pivot their efforts and focus primarily on 3A and get that out to bid in attempts for a 2022 construction season. Next slide. Unfortunately, things didn't quite go to our plan, quite follow through with our planning. Those bid documents were released in May of last year. The pre-bid meeting was very well attended, but unfortunately only 1 bid was received. That bid did have elevated unit price, so typically we'll see $400 to $500 a foot for planned replacement, and then emergency replacements is about $1,000 to $1,300 per foot. Unfortunately, this bid was a lot closer to the emergency unit price, and so at that point we decided to reject all bids and pivot back to a different process or a different mindset. So moving forward, staff decided to repackage the construction bid documents to include all 3 segments and work on those environmental efforts at the same time. By packaging the 3 miles together versus just the 1 mile, we're really hoping to get a greater economy of scale. Also, when we release these big documents early in the 2023 calendar year, hopefully it's more ideal for the construction season. Some of the feedback that we received when soliciting 3A was that it was later in the construction season, and so unfortunately those construction companies already had their resources allocated to other projects. So, and then I did want to mention too that this bid package will include a modified bid form, and so we'll separate out 3A, 3B, and 3C so that if we do run into the same situation where we have an elevated unit price, then maybe we can have a discussion of whether we want to award all 3 segments or if we have to scale back and just prioritize. All right, next slide. Alrighty, after today, the next steps are to release a request for qualifications. The intent for this is twofold. Is one, to garner interest for the project. It's 3 miles of pipe, and so staff realizes that it's going to take quite a bit of resources to get this project done. Also, hopefully we'll get a healthy list of qualified contractors for bidding. And then regarding those 2 creek segments, we'll be working with our environmental folks to perform the necessary analysis, and hopefully we have a target date of January 2023, but things happen. So directly following that will be release of bid documents. We're hoping for February, March, but we'll just have to see how it goes. Okay. So at this point, we've come a long way of just seeing what's out there, seeing what's in the sandbox. It's quite an historic area, so there's a handful of items that we'll need to incorporate in the design drawings. Utility conflict relocation, wastewater service connections. We've seen some atypical connections, and so during this project we'd like to correct those and make them right. Also incorporate any environmental mitigation measures, if any come up. Also vehicle turnouts for our air release valves. This will give our staff ample opportunity to safely navigate off the travel path and then service those air release valves. Alrighty. The initial design contract was for $74,000. We've had one amendment for traffic control plans. Today I'm speaking to you regarding Amendment 2. So the total contract amount is still within the General Manager's authority, but we are very, very close, which is why I'm here today. Alrighty, next slide. Before we go to construction, staff will execute a public outreach plan. Elements of that public outreach plan include a courtesy notice, email notification, and a project webpage. And I'm sure with the traffic control set up out there will have boards and be well seen in the right-of-way. All right, next slide. Funding. This project was identified in the 2022-2026 budget. We had about 2 miles of pipe before we saw some increases in the market pricing. So I will be working with our engineering folks to refine those estimates and include updated estimates in the upcoming CIP. All right.
What's the current ballpark for the whole project?
You know, I thought that question might come up. So let's see, the last time we did mother lode force main, it was $400 a foot. That was in 2013, so 10 years ago. I don't think we'll get close to that emergency unit price, but I would imagine we'd go up a $200 to $300 a foot, so maybe around $600 to $700 a foot. So I hesitate giving a defined number because our design engineers are still working on an estimate right now.
Maybe 10 million-ish?
In that ballpark, maybe
Right.
a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty, board options. Option 1, approve a contract change order to Dominicelli and Associates in the not to exceed amount of $22,010 for design of the mother lode force main Phase 3 and authorize additional funding of $22,010 for the mother lode force main Phase 3 project number 21081.01.
I have a couple of questions, Liz.
Should we be,
I'll move option 1.
We can ask questions.
okay, yeah, yeah,
Questions are okay, not
right.
debate.
Okay, the question is, what is the size of the town center force main? Is that 12 inch as well?
That
Great.
was upsized from 8-inch to 10-inch. And we still have one remaining portion at the very upstream portion of the pipeline.
So I guess my real question is, we're replacing a 12-inch main in the El Dorado main, and that's sufficient capacity for now and in the future? We don't need to upsize it at all?
So when we do projects in those corrosion-resistant PVC, the hope is that life is a 100-year lifespan, and so we'll look to the future and look to our modeling folks to help guide us on sizing that properly for what the needs are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. There's been a motion by Director Dwyer, seconded by Director Veerkamp, that we approve this action item. Now there's comment. Anybody from the audience or anybody online who has questions regarding this action?
President Enzini, it does not appear that any members of the public are wishing to make a comment on action item number 9, option 1, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Veerkamp. Believe we're ready for a vote.
Yes.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, item number 10, Office of the General Counsel.
Good morning, President Enzini and members of the board. Elizabeth Leeper, Senior Deputy General Counsel, here today to present for the board's consideration a contract change order for hydrologic modeling services, as well as additional funding related to our Permit 2112 water rights change and points of diversion project. Relevant prior actions of the board. 2 years ago, the board awarded the original contract to Zanjero to perform hydrologic modeling in support of this water rights project. Next slide, please. And more recently, earlier this year, the board awarded a contract change order to Zanjero for additional efforts in the hydrologic modeling services. And regarding this project, we are pursuing a water rights change petition, which would go to the State Water Resources Control Board, and that it would seek to add up to 2 additional points of authorized diversion for this existing water right. This water right project requires extensive hydrologic modeling in support of that water rights change petition. And so to continue those modeling efforts today, we are seeking a change order for the existing contract. It's been a little while since I was in front of the board regarding this project, so I did want to just provide a brief project overview, just get us all familiar with what we're seeking to do. And then I'll provide a brief update on the various efforts in support of that project, in particular the hydrologic modeling, but we've also been engaged in extensive stakeholder outreach, as well as initiating the environmental review in support of this project. And then, of course, we'll close out with the requested change order and funding request. And so for the project overview, we do have an existing water right. It's permit 2112. This was issued back in 2001. It allows for consumptive use and diversion of up to 17,000 acre-feet per year. And this water right operates as both direct diversion at Folsom, as well as we have the ability to store water in our upstream Project 184 reservoirs, and then we can release that stored water and divert that at Folsom. So it's both a direct diversion and diversions of previously stored water combo. But more importantly, the single point of diversion for all consumptive use for this water right is limited to Folsom Reservoir at this time. And so that leads to why we are seeking modification of this water right. We are seeking to allow 2 additional points of upstream diversion. So in addition to the existing Folsom diversion, we're looking at 2 additional locations. One would be at our existing facility, the El Dorado Diversion Dam, located at Kybers, and we would be seeking to exercise this right at that location. That particular proposal also involves the ability to then divert that water at Kybers and then ultimately store it in Jenkinson. That's a very important component because then we're not kind of limited to availability of water when our demands are peaking. We can actually pull that water when there's more water in the system, hold it in Jenkinson for later use. So very important piece of this proposal. And then we're also looking at potential diversions off of Sacramento Municipal Utility District's facilities, also known as SMUD. And for that diversion, we're looking at 2 possible locations. These would be one or the other of these locations, so either the White Rock Powerhouse Penstock or the Slab Creek Dam Reservoir location. As I mentioned, the proposed project, we would still maintain our existing diversion at Folsom, but we would have the flexibility to operate up to 3 points of diversion flexibly while still maintaining our Folsom diversion. And importantly, from a water rights perspective, we would still operate within the existing authorized maximum diversion of 17,000 acre-feet. So we're not expanding this right, we're just seeking flexibility within the existing authorized limits. And for the more visually inclined, there's a couple graphics that help illustrate some of the motivations for this project. So your top graphic, you'll see on your far left is Folsom Reservoir. That's the existing point of diversion for consumptive use for this water right. As you might note, it's at the geographic extreme of our service area, which is that lovely khaki shade. And so not ideal operationally to be at the extreme edge of a service area. And then you'll also notice, which is more depicted in the lower graphic, Folsom also happens to correspond to the lowest elevation in our service area. That also presents some operational challenges because you're effectively pumping up against the powers of gravity, so you really rely on more of a pumped conveyance system, which is not ideal for energy costs moving forward. And so you'll see the points of diversion that are being proposed, in contrast to Folsom, have some benefits. So in particular, the El Dorado Diversion Dam location at Kybers, it is on the kind of extreme edge of our service area. However, it's also the higher elevation. So that would really allow for more of a gravity-fed conveyance system, and we get the efficiencies of working with gravity instead of against it. And of course, we have existing diversion and conveyance facilities associated with Kybers. So this location really is ready to begin exercising this right once we have the permission from the State Water Board. So it's a ready-to-go location, which is very beneficial for near-term benefits. And then more in the center of the higher graphic, you have the two possible SMUD diversion locations at Slab Creek and White Rock. What you'll notice there is that they are quite central to our service area, so that would be very beneficial for kind of future distribution, particularly where we're seeing the most future growth in our service area.
Go ahead.
And then we also still have some of the benefits of the more gravity-fed conveyance at that location.
Yeah, this might be more of a technical question for Dan, but there's been some confusion that, well, if we do these upstream points of diversion, why do we need the Folsom Lake intake facility? Why do we spend so much money on that? And maybe, Dan, you can clarify, we could never take all 17,000 acre feet and ship it down at peak season to El Dorado Hills. We still need to pump water out of Folsom Lake.
And I don't want to underestimate the technical prowess of our Senior Deputy General Counsel. But I think 2021 is a great example, or excuse me, 2022 is a great example. This year, the other water rights have been curtailed. We do need portions of that water down the hill. But as you described, our projected build-out demand, because our water supply portfolio doesn't need that full amount down at the bottom for some period of time. Meanwhile, if we had that ability this year, we would actually have moved likely some of that water this year, last year, into Jacobson to increase the drought supply reliability. And that's exactly what Elizabeth was talking to. So from a urban water management plan, long-term planning, we look at one node, but from our water rights standpoint, we actually look at upstream and downstream and the most strategic way to store our water. So.
This gives us flexibility, but it would not be an alternative to.
In addition,
right.
Exactly. It's adding additional point of
diversion. We're still going to continue and have to continue to pump from Folsom Lake.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you manage it both annually and seasonally, and the Folsom Lake pump station's definitely a needed asset down there to provide water to the El Dorado Hills area, especially in the peak seasons down the hill.
And just a reminder that 30% of our El Dorado Hills are supplied from that Folsom Lake, right? All right.
And, you know, in terms of the investments.
Well, just to be clear, it's a third of our water right on an annualized basis. The number of customers are probably higher than the 30%, but yeah, 30% of our water rights annually are used down there. But we really need the pump station for the peak daily demands for the customers down there.
And I did want to highlight the valuable investments that the district made in the Folsom intake, including the temperature control device. The temperature control device was a condition of our Warren Act contract with Folsom. So Folsom is a federal facility. As a condition of exercising this right at Folsom, and we basically needed to do the temperature control device as a condition of that contract to enable us to get to the full 17. So that was a necessary investment to realize the full benefits of this right. Even if we were limited to Folsom Reservoir, we basically couldn't get to the second half of this water right without investing in that temperature control device. So to realize the existing benefits of that right, we needed to make that investment. Next slide, please. And so what are we seeking to accomplish with this project? First and foremost, our primary obligation is to meet the future water demand of our customers. And our long-term water supply planning documents indicate that particularly where we're seeing the largest areas of growth, this is going to be an important water supply to meet those future demands. And so we want to have the flexibility to utilize this right for those areas of growth moving forward. With any water right, we're seeking to optimize our existing water rights and ensure that we're beneficially using our existing rights. And so with those additional points of flexibility, we'll really have the flexibility to get the full benefit of this right in the near term. As I alluded to, we are looking for more of a gravity-fed conveyance system where we'll see the energy and saving costs associated with that. And, you know, I think the last couple years is probably a very good indicator that having flexibility, reliability, and drought resilience is going to be ever important in the future. And so now moving to the project status, we have been at this project for a couple years now. It's a complicated project. And in particular, the hydrologic modeling that we're performing really is the foundation for this water rights project. As you can imagine, once you're talking about diverting water at different locations in an existing system, you need to be able to model and show how that system will behave with those proposed diversions. And so this hydrologic model will serve as the foundation for both the water rights change petition process as well as the environmental review process. And so our modeling consultant, Zanjero, looked for ways to gain efficiencies by looking at existing models that were already basically on the streets and seeing if we could essentially use that as a starting point for some efficiency in this effort. And so what they have developed is what's called the HEC-ResSim hydrologic modeling tool, and they built upon an existing model, which I'll go into more detail. And this model will reflect both what's called baseline conditions, so that's a CEQA term you might have heard, but we need to reflect what are the existing conditions in the system, and then we also need to model our proposed additional points of diversion and those operations and see if there's project effects on the system. So a layered modeling effort. And so in terms of what we started with as a starting point for the modeling effort, our consultant identified that there was an existing model that was developed for SMUD's Upper American River project, and this was developed as part of SMUD's FERC relicensing effort back in 2005. So the benefit of this is that this had already modeled essentially the SMUD side of the Upper American River system. So we had that piece to build upon, and we had the efficiencies from starting with that existing model. So that's depicted in kind of that upper blue is essentially what we started with. The lower tan is essentially what we're influencing with our operations, and that was not part of that existing model. And so what our modeling consultant is doing is they're essentially building out so that we now have a complete operational hydrologic model that reflects Upper American River operations. And so you'll see now this reflects our existing modeling effort, and so we've built out all of the EID operations, and you'll see all of those red nodes essentially are active components of the model where you can have specific data inputs, specific data outputs. So hopefully this gives a feel for some of the complexity of this particular model. And then since we had a 2005 model that we were starting with, our modeler also goes in and basically inputs the actual hydrology that we've experienced since 2005. And so we now have a model that actually shows how the system has behaved from 1975 to 2019. So actual hydrology as the foundation for this model.
So then if we had the model, or SMUD had the model, and then we had experience, recent experience since 2005, does it match with what the model predicted our actual experience?
So it's a little counterintuitive in terms of how this model is going to behave, and I'll try to explain it. So basically what we're trying to get the model to say is if we had a year like 2005 with current operations, how would the system behave? And so you're really taking current conditions and overlaying it with a prior hydrologic experience. And so you're not actually testing it against that prior year because it's current operations. So we're really trying to say, how would the system behave in a year like we've experienced previously, but with current conditions? So there's not a true truth check in terms of this year compared to prior years, but our modeler does do a bunch of quality control measures, and they do fine-tune that. So they still check against how's the model behaving relative to prior hydrology. I know, this is an attorney talking about modeling. It's my understanding from the modelers that the model is accurately depicting prior hydrology. Thank you.
That clarified for you? Yeah, I got it.
Hydro translation.
Did we skip a slide? Sorry. Yes. So in addition to our HEC-ResSim model, of course, one model is never sufficient in the water rights world, and so we actually have an additional modeling effort, which is really to try to model Folsom and beyond. Because Folsom is a federal facility, that already has a modeling suite that people use for federal operations called CalSim. You may have heard of that. And so really what we need to do is we need to have our upstream model, and then that needs to talk to CalSim to basically follow the water from Folsom and beyond. So it's a two-part modeling effort. What CalSim will look at is potential impacts to Folsom Reservoir cold water pool, which is a very important aspect of management on the federal system. And then just generally water temperature and flow management in the lower American rivers. So there is an additional separate modeling effort for Folsom and beyond.
In the narrative, you pointed out that there was a flaw in the previous models. Was it in the CalSim model, or was it in?
It was in the CalSim model. So similar to kind of your iPhone updates, models also get kind of a rollout. So we're dealing with the fairly new CalSim 3 model. It hasn't had a lot of playtime, and so when we started utilizing CalSim 3, our modelers observed that it wasn't behaving well. And so with some coordination with the Department of Water Resources, who is responsible for developing that CalSim 3 model, they did discover a bug, and DWR was very responsive in giving us, a patch to fix that, but we did have to spend a little bit of time troubleshooting and exploring what was causing that problem. So part of new technology and new models is you get to sometimes discover the bugs.
Right, thank you. But that bug did cause us some extra cost.
Yes. Yes.
Is there a way that DWR might want to share in that cost since it was their bug?
Well, I'll say that maybe we benefit from utilizing an existing model that others have spent a lot of money developing. So I'll view it as we're saving in terms of being able to utilize the existing CalSim model as a tool. So no.
You need to run for office.
Well, EID is the end user, probably early on end user critic, and that's what technology does. So, yeah.
Next slide, please. And so I did allude to this, but I do want to just emphasize the complexity and layered nature of this modeling effort. I'm not a modeler, but I've been close enough to this project to realize it's always more complicated than you think it's going to be, and you discover things along the way. So as I mentioned, a huge part of this effort was compiling and updating the hydrologic information. So this is actual gauged information at various locations for the entire hydrologic period. And so that gives us kind of it gives us the very foundation for building upon the rest of the model. Is we need to understand what historical hydrology on the system has been. Once we have the hydrology, we then have to overlay that with the operational regime that this system is experiencing. So as I mentioned, the SMUD part of this was essentially built out, but our operations were not built out. So as you can imagine, we have a fairly complicated operational system. So we've been working on building all the operational rules into that model. So that would be conditions of our water rights, when and how can we divert, some of our, all of our information about our reservoirs, our storage, et cetera. So quite a bit there. And then, of course, the last layer is what are we proposing to do? How would we divert? When would we divert? And what's the kind of diversion pattern the system would see with our project? So hopefully I've conveyed that that is a complex and iterative process. And then in addition to coordinating with, of course, EID staff on operations, we've also been coordinating with SMUD to make sure we're accurately depicting their operations. And then, of course, the American River is a very loved resource by many and a very important resource for a lot of water rights holders, such as SMUD. And so we've been engaged in an extensive outreach effort, which we will continue. And so to give you a sense of some of the stakeholder engagement we've already engaged with, first and foremost, SMUD is obviously a downstream operator. They're also the owner and operator of the facility that we're proposing to divert from. So appropriately, they made it to the top of the list. But as you can see, the stakeholder engagement ranges from other operators on the system, regulatory agencies such as the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then as anyone that's rafted the system knows, it's a very popular whitewater recreational area, so that's an important stakeholder group moving forward. And then in addition to the hydrologic modeling effort, we are doing environmental review for this project where we are preparing an environmental impact report, an EIR. As you might imagine, that environmental review is going to be highly dependent on the hydrologic modeling as essentially the primary input into a lot of the resource categories such as hydrology, also biology, the aquatic species on the system, recreation, hydropower. And so to make sure that we're being efficient with development of the EIR, we have largely held back substantial work on the EIR until we make sure that we have the hydrologic modeling in a very good place, and we've kind of confirmed that all the parts are moving correctly. So hopefully we're entering a more substantive phase on the CEQA review shortly. And so moving to today, what are we asking of the board? We are seeking a change order for the existing hydrologic modeling contract. And what's causing this particular change order, there's several things. Our experience as we've moved forward with modeling is that, well, a couple of things, but in particular, I mentioned that we were utilizing the existing model that was developed for SMUD's UARP system. When we scoped this project, we were assuming that we would be able to leave that piece of the model essentially untouched as an existing operational model. But through our stakeholder engagements with SMUD, they did express that they had concerns that that no longer reflected their current operations. In particular, that existing model assumed that SMUD would be making additional discretionary power releases. But what SMUD has told us is that there are times when they're really operating to more of a regulatory regime where it's just in-stream flow obligations. And so there were some operational rules that we really need to modify to more accurately reflect SMUD's current operations based on that feedback. So there is some work to be done on modifying those operational rules. That was not anticipated in the original scope. And then we've also experienced that stakeholders sometimes would like to see the modeling packaged in a certain way that's more specific to their interests. So they might want to look at, could you please package this so that we're only looking at these locations, or we're only looking at, you know, stream flows at Chili Bar compared to the FERC license conditions. So to make sure that we're being responsive to stakeholders, we are spending some time kind of packaging the modeling output to be the most responsive and informative to particular stakeholders. Of course, that does take time and effort by our consultant, but we do think that that's a valuable effort. And then in addition, we are seeking some additional time to extend the hydrology even further to reflect the most recent years. As you know, we're experiencing a drought. It's always important with these types of projects that you reflect the current hydrology, particularly when you're experiencing a recent drought. So we are asking the consultant to add the last year's, which was not part of the original scope at that time. And so, in summary, we are seeking a contract change order with our existing contract in the amount of $174,100. And then, in addition, we are seeking additional capitalized labor for my wonderful co-manager, Brian Deason, Environmental Resources Supervisor, to continue to support this project. And that funding source will be 100% water facility capacity charges for this water rights effort. And so, option 1 is approve a contract change order to Zanjero Inc. in the not to exceed amount of $174,100 for additional hydrologic modeling services and authorize additional funding of $30,000 for capitalized labor for a total funding request of $204,100 for the permit 2112 change in a point of diversion project number 16003.
Okay.
And we recommend option 1.
What's the timeline
Could you be more specific?
for completing the model?
I would have liked to have estimated that based on the original scope, but we've experienced that it's more iterative than we've imagined. For this particular baseline and project modeling, I think we're about 6 months out from having that fully dialed in. But then the modeling effort will continue to support the EIR. And so there will be additional modeling, for example, if we're looking at mitigation measures that would affect diversion patterns, or if we're looking at alternatives that would affect diversion patterns, then there would be modeling that corresponds to the development of the EIR as well. So it's going to be kind of a rolling schedule as we move along. And then once we get to the change petition process, we may do specialized modeling in response to that process as well. So we're going to be at this for a couple more years in terms of seeing the change petition through and doing all the necessary modeling.
Okay.
I'll move option 1.
I'll second.
All right, been motioned and seconded by Director Day and Director Dwyer. Here's an opportunity for public comment.
President Enzini, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 10, option 1, moved by Director Day and seconded by Director Dwyer. I believe we're ready for a vote.
Board members vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was informative and at the end of the agenda. We are now at that point for going into closed session, and we will come back in about how long?
President Enzini, thank you. We will be meeting in closed session for the matters that have been agendized on today's agenda as closed session items A, B, and C. And I anticipate that the board's consideration of these 3 items will require at least 1/2 hour. So I would anticipate that we will not reconvene until at least 11:15.
Okay, thank you.
For the purposes of this meeting, we will close down this meeting, and we won't open it prior to 11:15 a.m. However, it may be after for the report out of closed session and adjournment.
We'll bring this meeting back to order. General Counsel.
President Enzini, the board met and conferred with council on the 3 matters described on today's agenda as closed session items A, B, and C. The board provided guidance but took no reportable action, and that concludes my report.
Okay. Are there any items that the board members want to point out on future items on the agenda? No? Okay. Therefore, we cancel this meeting. End of the meeting.
11:57, meeting adjourned.